Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I hadn't spoken to anyone in over 5 months. Last person I talked to was a guard sergeant at the Delta Zone processing camp near I-80. That was before the riots, before the fires, before they shot their own people over a pallet of dry cereal. His name was Keller, seemed decent, got eaten when one of the fence lines failed at night. I watched the whole thing happen from under a decommissioned fuel truck, holding my breath while the infected chewed through his plate carrier like it was foam padding. They never found me. I stayed another 12 hours and slipped out through the wash ditch. After that, I didn't bother looking for people. I didn't trust anyone left in this country. The ones who weren't infected were either starving or shooting at you over a half-used bottle of rubbing alcohol. I walked east for a few weeks, then cut south through the suburbs once the weather turned dry. I had no real destination, just kept moving. Couldn't sleep more than a few hours a night. Couldn't eat without gagging half the time. I started drinking more than I used to. Not for fun, just to keep the thoughts away when it got quiet. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't care. I used to work in game design, 20 years in systems modeling, AI behavior trees, and game logic balancing, mostly survival games. I built things people never paid attention to: weapon weight penalties, footstep noise propagation, dynamic stamina drain. I knew how survival should feel because I'd modeled it for fake worlds my whole life. Then the real one broke and none of it helped. My wife was gone by month 4. Caught in the second outbreak at one of the federal shelters in South Dakota. My daughter made it 2 weeks longer before a breach in one of the dormitory wings. I only heard about it from someone who escaped. I didn't see it myself. I still haven't forgiven myself for that. That morning, I was passing through a neighborhood that looked like every other half-dead place I'd drifted through. Sloped lawns, mailboxes tipped sideways, pickup trucks left with the doors open and the keys still in the ignition. Nobody left alive. Nobody left home. Most of the houses had been picked clean. You could tell which ones had bodies inside by the smell. The infected tended to leave a stink if they'd been locked in too long. But even the rotting had a rhythm. If you paid attention, you could feel it before you got too close. I was planning to head to an old construction depot that a couple of scavvers said still had intact shelves. It was 2 miles west of me, and I had a water bottle half full and 3 crackers left. I thought I'd reach it by nightfall if I kept my pace. But then, I passed a 2-story house near the corner with a broken window and blood sprayed across the concrete steps. I stopped in my tracks without thinking. It looked fresh. Maybe a day, maybe 2. The glass on the front walk hadn't turned black yet, and there were multiple drag trails on the driveway. At first, I was going to keep going. Too many unknowns. Could be a death trap. Could be someone still alive inside. And I wasn't in the mood to get shot by a homeowner defending 3 cans of soup. But then, I saw that the curtains were shredded and the inside looked like a wreck. One of the infected was slumped on the floor, picking at a body that wasn't even twitching anymore. There was too much blood for anyone to have survived. The front door was closed but crooked. Somebody had tried to hold the line here and failed. I circled the block once and came back through the side alley. The backyard was overgrown but clear. I crept around and checked the back window, found it pried open with the screen hanging by a corner. I eased myself in, boots first, and landed in what used to be a dining room. Broken plates and toys everywhere. One of the chairs had a belt strapped across it, like someone had tried to tie someone down. I didn't want to think about it. I moved through the kitchen quick and quiet, checking each cabinet for sound before opening it. Found a few cans, one of them bulging. Tossed that, grabbed 2 good ones, peanut butter and corn. There was also a flashlight missing its lens, and a junk drawer with some batteries, mostly dead. I pocketed a roll of medical tape and a sealed zip bag of cotton pads. Then I ducked into the garage and froze. The place was a mess, but not the same kind of mess as the rest of the house. It wasn't panic. It was half-finished work. Notes were pinned to a corkboard above a workbench, and in the center of the garage stood a full body frame of some kind of armor rig, suspended from a hoist by chains. I stepped closer and saw what it really was. plastic sheeting reinforced with aluminum plates, old motocross gear, bits of riot padding, and what looked like layered roofing material bolted into thigh guards. It wasn't clean, it wasn't finished, but it was clearly something someone had put weeks or months of effort into. The scribbled notes taped to the pegboard had bullet points, things like minimize snag risk, full coverage joints, don't forget neck seals, and armor must be silent, weight under 55 pounds. Whoever this guy was, he had thought it through. He even built a prototype for the forearm braces with angled slats, bite-resistant mesh underlay, and notes about tension bands for muscle movement. Some of it was janky, some of it looked smart. I shook my head. It was the kind of thing you'd see at a cosplay convention before everything fell apart. I sat down on the stool, exhaled hard, and took the weight off my back. I reached into the bin next to the bench and pulled out a half-full bottle of whiskey. There was dust on the glass, but the seal hadn't been cracked. I opened it without hesitating and drank 4 mouthfuls. No pause. The burn was dull. I didn't feel anything. Not surprise, not fear, not hope. Just hollow. Then I leaned back against the shelf and slid down until I was sitting on the cold concrete with my legs out straight and the bottle resting against my thigh. I must have passed out sometime before sundown. When I woke up, it was morning, and nothing had changed. The infected hadn't found me. The power was out, but the garage door was still shut, and the air smelled like oil and metal and mildew. I rubbed my face with the edge of my sleeve and sat back up. My pack was where I left it, crowbar still strapped in, no bites, no noise. I hadn't died in my sleep. That was starting to feel like the standard. I stood up and checked the armor rig again. It wasn't just junk. There was a kind of logic to it. The way the parts connected, the placement of the hinges, even the weight balance from the shoulder frame to the hip pads. This wasn't a fantasy suit. It was an attempt, a real one. I looked closer at the name scratched into the side of a storage tub. Greaves. Probably the guy who built it. Probably the one dead in the living room with half his torso missing. Or maybe the one upstairs I didn't want to meet. I didn't leave the house that day. I should have, but I didn't. Something about the space felt not safe, but focused, intentional, like it had been waiting to be finished. I spent most of that day reorganizing the tools, checking the storage bins, reading the diagrams. There were guides on how to build the armor for real, how to cut aluminum sheet properly, how to seal foam to stop teeth from slipping underneath, how to anchor plates without sacrificing flexibility. It was insane, but also not. Not if you were desperate, not if you were alone, not if you'd seen what I had. By sundown, I had sorted most of the gear into labeled piles. I had 3 days of food, 1 working lighter, no clean water, and a hangover that wouldn't stop knocking at the base of my skull. But I wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. I had an idea forming, a quiet one, not hope, just motion. By the next morning, I had already taken stock of what I needed and what was broken beyond saving. The leg plates were cracked and delaminating, probably from moisture exposure and bad storage. The shoulder frame had rust around the rivet points. One of the forearm braces had a crack in the hinge that looked like it had been bent with a crowbar. The whole chest plate was built over an old motocross harness that had lost its padding and smelled like sweat sealed under duct tape. The thing wasn't wearable, not yet, but the bones were there. Someone with time and patience could fix it. I hadn't had either of those in a long time, but something about that frame, hanging from the pulley rack in the middle of the garage, kept me from walking out the door. I made a decision that morning that I didn't say out loud. I was going to stay for a little while, long enough to clean up the workbench, fix the front barricade, and maybe start sorting which parts were salvageable. That was all I told myself. Just stay a few days, long enough to rest my knees and figure out where to head next. But in the back of my head, I already knew I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The suit was a mess, but it wasn't fantasy. It wasn't some Mad Max trash armor built out of scrap for show. This thing had real structure. The guy who started it had clearly understood weight distribution and mobility. He wasn't trying to build a tank. He was aiming for full body protection that you could still move in. The documentation wasn't just hand sketches. He'd printed technical sheets, adapted motorcycle and hockey armor templates, and even logged bite force resistance tests. He knew what he was up against. I spent most of that day cataloging the materials. There were 2 full bins of screws, brackets, fasteners, and offcuts. Some of it was junk, but a lot of it was usable. He had polycarbonate sheeting cut into curved panels, strips of thermoplastic, a few square feet of chainmail remnant, and half a roll of fiberglass tape. There were broken goggles with the lenses still intact, 2 damaged knee guards, a stack of face shields with cracked corners, and a roll of thick mesh that could probably be bent into something useful. In a smaller bin under the bench, I found spare zippers, tension bands, rivets, and a small bag labeled "Bite Simulation Failed. Replace." That told me whoever had been working on this didn't just build for looks. He'd tested it, probably tested it on himself or something close to a leave infected. I ate a can of corn cold with a screwdriver because I'd lost my last spoon 3 towns ago. It wasn't good. The metal tasted off, and I think the can was past expiration, but I didn't get sick. I drank the last quarter-liter of water I had and held off using the iodine tablets. I didn't know how long I was staying, but I didn't want to waste the last of my purification gear until I had a water source lined up. The second day, I started cleaning the parts and laying out the major components on the workbench. I had no protective gear, so I worked bare-handed and tried to avoid slicing my fingers on any of the rough-cut metal edges. The leg guards were the worst. Whoever cut them originally must have used a dull grinder because the edges were warped and chipped. I took my time bending them back into shape using a rubber mallet and a clamp. Took almost 2 hours to straighten one. The garage had no real airflow, and I was sweating by the end of it, even with the door cracked for light. Later that day, I opened a bin I hadn't touched yet. It had blueprints rolled up in protective tubes. When I pulled one out and unrolled it, I found the first detailed drawing of what the final suit was meant to look like. It wasn't sleek or pretty. The arms were bulky. The chest had overlapping layers like roofing shingles. The joints were enclosed in what looked like mesh sleeves bolted into rings. It had padding along the ribs and reinforced groin protection. The faceplate design had 6 versions drawn out, each with annotations for visibility, fog resistance, and impact dispersion. One note in red ink read, "Field of vision must not compromise threat detection. Never sacrifice sight for coverage." That stuck with me. Most people didn't understand that principle, but I had seen it play out the hard way. People who lost situational awareness didn't last long. Helmets that blocked side vision got you dragged down before you saw the second infected coming. I took apart the chest piece that evening. It was bolted into a mounting plate made from a cooking tray of all things, which I removed and replaced with a double-layered plastic sheet I salvaged from a storage tote. I traced the mount points, drilled new holes, and cut channels for zip ties. I used hose clamps to reinforce the lower connection points. The new layout sat flatter and didn't press into the ribs as much when I leaned forward. I couldn't test it fully yet, but I knew from design work that it would give a better angle of motion. I also marked a spot on the back where a hydration pack could eventually be rigged. Might have been premature, but it gave me something to work toward. By day 3, I had broken the suit down into 5 major components: helmet, chest and spine shell, arms, legs, and groin shield. I had enough raw material to begin reconstructing the arm section. The forearms came first. I used curved polycarbonate sheets laminated with fiberglass tape, then drilled and mounted overlapping bite plates across the outer surface. They weren't pretty, but they gave coverage from wrist to elbow and flexed just enough to allow grip movement. I tried sliding one over my left arm and adjusted the internal strap tension. It held, a little tight, but manageable. I moved my wrist back and forth. The range wasn't bad. I had to leave the house the next morning to scavenge for water. I mapped out a short loop, 6 blocks west, 2 north, where I remembered seeing a house with a rain barrel next to a gutter. I avoided the main road and cut through backyards, staying behind fences and moving slow. I wore the forearm guard on my left side under my jacket, mostly to test how it carried. It added weight, but not enough to slow me. The straps rubbed a bit, so I noted that for adjustment later. The rain barrel was half full and covered with a loose board. The water inside was dark but not contaminated by smell. I filled 2-liter bottles and dropped in iodine tablets, then wrapped them in a shirt and packed them tight. I was heading back when I saw movement 3 houses ahead, 2 infected moving slow near a collapsed mailbox. I ducked behind a hedge and watched them. Both had bloated bellies and dried blood on their shirts. They weren't fast, and they weren't hunting, just wandering. I didn't engage, didn't need to. I moved wide, took the alley, and got back to the garage without issue. When I got back, I checked the barricades. Nothing had moved. I boiled some water on a camping burner I rigged from a fuel canister and scrap metal, used it to clean the inside of my bottle and to wipe down my jacket. I spent the rest of the day reshaping the shin guards. One had a deep dent where a pipe must have hit it. I used the mallet again, padded with a towel to avoid cracking the material, bent it back to a reasonable arc, and added rubber edge trim from a toolbox drawer I hadn't noticed earlier. The trim worked better than expected, soft enough to absorb impact, hard enough to deflect teeth. I screwed it in using stainless fasteners and sealed it with electrical tape. The hangover was gone by then. Not the urge to drink, but the ache in my skull had passed. I hadn't opened the other bottles. I kept them stored under the shelf. I thought about pouring them out, but I didn't. Not yet. Just having them there made me feel in control somehow, like I could say no because I chose to, not because I had no choice. That night, I stayed in the garage again. No infected had broken in. No one had come to scavenge. I still didn't know who had died upstairs, or if any of the rooms beyond the living room still held corpses. I didn't check. I didn't need to. The dead weren't going anywhere, and the ones that moved would come to me eventually if I made enough noise. I had rebuilt the entire left side armor array by the end of the 5th day. Left arm, left leg, shoulder brace, and thigh guard. I could strap it on in under 3 minutes and move without locking up at the joints. The left shin plate still pinched a little when I crouched, but I marked that for future correction. I took photos of the setup using a broken phone I'd salvaged from a box. The camera still worked. I figured documenting the build might help if I didn't survive, and someone else found the workshop. By now, the house didn't feel like a temporary shelter. It felt like a staging ground. I had routines. I had priorities. I had a reason to measure the passing days. I made my first real test run on the 7th day. I armored my left side fully, carried a blunt trenching tool, and headed to a nearby cul-de-sac I'd scouted the day before. I picked a target, one infected, emaciated, slow-moving, and made contact. I didn't strike first. I let it grab for me. It lunged. Its fingers scraped the forearm plate, bit down against the polycarbonate. I felt the pressure but no penetration. The material held. I shoved it back, stepped in, and crushed the jaw with a 2-handed blow. Not elegant, not cinematic, just a direct kill. It went down and didn't get up. I stood over it and watched the blood pool under the skull. Then I walked back to the house without saying a word. Back at the garage, I stripped off the armor without rushing. Every buckle, every strap. I laid each piece on the table and checked the seams with both hands. The left forearm plate had scuff marks from the teeth, 5 shallow gouges near the outer edge, and a hairline crack where the hinge flexed. Nothing penetrated, nothing splintered. It held. The bite didn't reach skin. That was the point. I wrote everything down. Materials used, contact pressure estimate, reaction time, damage zones, strap tear. I logged it all in the corner of a dry blueprint sheet, just to keep record. Not because I expected anyone to care, because I needed to know it for next time. The test confirmed the plates could take a direct bite from a slow mover. That meant the suit had a chance. Not for invincibility, not for style, but enough to walk through somewhere the rest of the world had stopped going. By the 2nd week, I had rebuilt the right arm plate, doubled the strap mounts, reinforced the knee joints with new inner pads made from foam I pulled out of a disassembled weight bench. It wasn't perfect, but it braced better, less shift when kneeling. The chest shell got an extra plate across the upper sternum, laminated from a kitchen cabinet door, I soared to size and wrapped in fiberglass. The weight was climbing, but not past the threshold. I stayed under 50 pounds fully loaded, excluding the tool belt and crowbar. That was the line I set. Anything more and mobility would suffer. I tried walking laps inside the house to test motion. I could crouch, kneel, pivot, sidestep, and shift weight without losing balance. The armor made noise, but I dampened it using cut rubber strips at the contact points and double-secured any plates that clicked together. It wasn't silent, but it wasn't a dinner bell either. I couldn't outrun a sprinting infected in it, but I could hold my ground against one or two, maybe more if I kept my head. I had finished the basic rig by day 15. It covered chest, back, arms, thighs, shins, and forearms. The helmet wasn't ready yet. I was still using a basic construction hard hat with side straps and a bolted-on polycarbonate face shield I drilled through the lens. It blocked some of my vision, but it was better than nothing. I kept a set of goggles under it to stop splatter or bone shards from hitting my eyes. For now, that would have to be enough. The next morning I packed 2 cans of food, 1 crowbar, a belt pouch with electrical tape, and a spare water bottle with a makeshift filter rigged from coffee filters and charcoal. I wrapped a cloth over the bottle to keep it from reflecting and secured the pack tight. No loose straps, no buckles hanging. I walked out of the garage just after sunrise. The air was still. No birds, no wind, just empty sky and dead silence. I didn't bother locking the front door. Nothing alive would be breaking in. The dead didn't use doorknobs. I took the long road west toward the construction megastore. It was about 2 miles. I'd passed it on the first day I came through this area, but I hadn't gone near it since. There were too many unknowns. But now I had a reason. I needed parts. New clamps, a proper faceplate, maybe a tool rig, more thermal tape, zip ties, heavy-duty sheeting, anything I could use to extend coverage without sacrificing flexibility. I moved through the streets at a steady pace. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I scanned every yard and kept close to fences or vehicles for cover. The armor shifted with every step, but it didn't slow me much. My breathing stayed even. I made it to the depot in just under an hour. The parking lot was half empty, half full of overgrown weeds, broken carts, and 2 burned-out cars near the garden center entrance. The main doors had been shattered long ago. Glass covered the tile inside, mixed with dried blood and old footprints. Some looked recent, maybe a few days, maybe more. I crouched near a low wall and watched the entry for a solid 5 minutes before moving in. The place was massive. Open structure, steel beams overhead, aisles stacked with debris and display racks turned sideways. Someone had been through here before, but not recently. I could smell rot coming from the back near the paint section. Either something died back there or something still moved. I stayed low and moved slow through the main aisle, eyes scanning each end cap and side row for movement. No sound, just the creak of my boots and the faint rustle of rats under the shelving. The light was poor. Roof panels were stained, some broken. Sunlight came in at odd angles, casting sharp shadows in places I couldn't see fully. I used my mirror shard to check corners before committing. I didn't carry a flashlight. Too risky. Light would attract the infected. So would noise. If I ran into anything, I'd have to use the armor and end it quick. I reached the fastener aisle first. Most of the shelves had been looted, but deeper in the row I found a full box of galvanized brackets, 2 unopened packs of hose clamps, and a partial roll of industrial-strength Velcro. Jackpot. I dropped it all into the pack, then checked behind the shelf using the mirror. Nothing. I worked fast, but not carelessly. Every time I took a corner, I cleared it with the crowbar raised. Every time I stepped over debris, I tested footing first. I stayed near the concrete center line, quietest path underfoot. I marked my route back mentally. 4 lefts, 1 right, long straight, exit. If something went wrong, I didn't want to guess. I'd made it halfway through the store when I heard the first sound. Low dragging shuffle, far back in the lumber area. I froze and waited. No second sound, no pattern. Could have been wind against loose material or a rat. I didn't investigate. I made a note of the noise and avoided that entire zone. I wasn't there to clear the place. I just wanted what I came for. Near the tool section, I found a wall hook display with plastic face shields still sealed. Most were cracked. 2 were intact. I took both and slid them under the inner flap of my pack. Between the clamps and the sheeting, I pulled off a toppled display rack. I found nothing useful in the lighting section, but I did grab a short extension cord to scavenge copper wire for future strap reinforcement. Every little piece mattered now. No stores, no deliveries, no replacements. You got one shot to build what you needed. Break it, and it's gone forever. As I moved past the insulation row, I caught a faint breath of something sour. Not rot, not infection, sweat, human. Someone had been here. Recently. I stopped, crouched near a stack of boxed foam rolls, and waited. I stayed motionless for over 5 minutes, watching the far end of the aisle through a sliver in the packaging. No movement, no cough, no shuffle. Whoever had passed through was either gone or deeper in. Either way, I didn't push further. I turned back toward the exit route, doubled my speed, and kept one hand on the crowbar from that point forward. I reached the garden center exit and paused by the caged fencing. The air was cooler there, filtered through the broken roof panels. I checked my pack weight. Manageable. Maybe 35 pounds with the new haul. I scanned the lot before stepping out. Still clear. I crossed the pavement in a crouch and moved into the tree line behind the property. It took longer to return. I stuck to the alleys and shifted course twice to avoid a group of walkers that were tangled in an old swing set behind a duplex. One spotted me through a fence but couldn't reach. I didn't kill it. I just moved on. I made it back to the house by mid-afternoon. I pulled the garage door down manually, slow and quiet, then locked it from the inside with the chain latch I had bolted in the day before. Once sealed, I dropped the pack, stripped the armor piece by piece, and started inventory. I logged the tools, logged the new parts, cleaned each faceplate with boiled water and wiped them dry using one of the last clean rags I had. Then I sat down, opened the peanut butter jar, and ate 4 spoonfuls without even tasting it. Just fuel. I was soaked in sweat. The back of my shirt had dark salt rings where the pack rubbed. My fingers were raw from gripping the crowbar too long. My neck ached. My feet throbbed. But I had made it into a high-risk zone, pulled gear, and walked out without damage. That was something. Not luck, not courage, just preparation. That night, I upgraded the helmet. I mounted the clearer shield with a better field of view. I added new strap mounts using the copper wire and reinforced the pivot point with the hose clamps. I adjusted the faceplate angle by shaving the corners and sealing the edge with trimmed rubber to stop fogging. It worked. Not perfect, but good enough to see without exposing too much. I ran a full test of the updated suit in the backyard that evening. No infected, just motion drills. Sit, stand, duck, crouch, roll, swing, twist, repeat. My knees popped, my hips resisted, but the armor didn't slip. No joints jammed, no plates clashed. I wrote that down. Then I boiled a liter of water, drank half, and stored the rest. Sleep came hard that night. My mind kept playing the sound I heard near the lumber section. The drag, the pause, the silence after. Could have been a crawler. Could have been something worse. I'd seen them. Those half-torn ones that only moved when you passed them. Ones that listened. Ones that waited. I didn't know what that sound was, but I'd see it again eventually. I always did. I was up before daylight, still in the sleeping bag, eyes open, just staring at the ceiling. That sound had stayed with me. I didn't dream. I never did anymore. But my brain still ran footage in the background. Old fights, broken fences, the hospital stairwell where we lost our group medic, the face of my daughter when she handed me a note and walked away without looking back. All of it recycled itself at the edges of consciousness. I couldn't shut it off. I just lay there and let it move. When the sun came up, I made coffee using a tin of burned grounds and boiled water. It tasted like rubber, but it was warm and kept me sharp. I sat on the floor of the garage, armor pieces spread around me like parts of a body. I looked at the joints. I ran my fingers along the straps. I kept thinking about that dragging sound. It wasn't just about the armor anymore. I needed to learn how to move with it like it was skin, not a costume. I needed to know what failed under pressure. I needed a real test. Controlled, repeatable, something I could measure. That meant I needed to stop scavenging and start training. I spent that day prepping the depot. I returned on foot, same route, full armor load. I brought flags, just strips of cloth on broken stakes. I mapped out the internal layout on a sheet of plywood I dragged into the garage the week before. I'd memorized the major aisles and exits already, but now I made it exact. Distance markers, path widths, lure zones, choke points, exit vectors. I wasn't playing games anymore. This wasn't theory. This was live testing in a post-collapse environment. No margin for mistakes. The construction megastore was big enough to run drills. I didn't plan to clear it. That would take days, and the risk would outweigh the return. But I could section off parts of it, fence them, block off routes with carts, pallets, and locked gates. Build a training zone where I could lure infected one at a time, observe their behavior under stress, and test how the armor handled in motion. The back-loading dock gave me a good starting point. It was closed on 3 sides and had a roll-up gate I could open just enough to let one target in at a time. I started hauling supplies. I used broken shelving as barriers, trash bins filled with bricks as anchors. I built a funnel, wide entry, narrow corridor, forced angle to the left with limited sightlines. This gave me a route where the infected would always have to round a corner before reaching me. That gave me a moment to act. I set up chalk markers on the floor, one for standby, one for engagement, one for retreat. Then I taped the inside of my gauntlet with a reminder. Clear corner, count steps, listen first. I didn't go loud on the first run. I used scent instead. Raw meat from a freezer I'd found still intact in a suburban kitchen. Thawed and rotting. I tied it to a wire, hung it near the dock gate, and waited. The wind was light. I watched from the upper office using a busted security window. Took 23 minutes before one showed up. Male, broad shoulders, torn flannel shirt, barefoot. Moved slow but not aimless. He locked onto the scent and started pressing against the fencing. His fingers gripped the chain link like he was pulling himself into it. I waited. No other infected nearby. I opened the gate half a foot. Just enough. He followed the smell in without hesitation. I stepped into position and let him come. I didn't strike until he reached the corner. He rounded it too fast and got stuck between 2 bins. I hit him once in the side of the neck with a modified pipe wrench. Didn't go down. Hit again temple. He dropped. I moved in and finished it with a downward strike to the skull. Full collapse. No twitching. The armor held. No blood penetration. Some splatter. I cleaned it immediately and checked for damage. One strap had pulled loose from the thigh guard. I replaced it with a zip tie and noted the torque failure. I sketched the engagement path on the floor with chalk, drew a circle where the infected hesitated, noted it on my map. First run complete. I called it Trial 01, Standard Male, No Mutation, Direct Lure. I spent the next 3 days running more drills. 1 per day. I only lured solo targets. Never groups. I wanted clean data. Trial 2 involved a female infected with a limp, partially broken hip, shuffled right side. Slower, but her hands worked fast. She grabbed my wrist during contact and pulled hard. If I hadn't reinforced the forearm strap, it would have twisted off. I staggered, recovered, slammed the crowbar down through her collarbone, and crushed the head on the second strike. Learned from that. Added a wrist tether on the inside elbow to prevent spin. Trial 3 didn't go clean. I misjudged the entry path. 2 came in instead of 1. A second had been behind a support beam, and I didn't see him. The first hit the funnel. The second veered around and came from the left side. I pivoted, blocked with the shield, and took a full impact to the ribs. Knocked the wind out of me, but the armor held. I kicked the first back, crushed the second with the hammer, then circled to finish the first before he could recover. Took longer, messy. I left the area after that, didn't reset the trap. I went home and wrote up the mistake in red ink. Do not assume single target. Use elevation for visibility. No blind corners. I upgraded the dock funnel with overhead barriers after that. Used metal rods and construction netting to reduce line-of-sight gaps. I also built a perch using an overturned counter to allow above-eye surveillance. No more surprises from the side. The armor received its first full cleaning that evening. I used boiled water and alcohol solution to scrub every joint, even the inner sleeves. The stench had started to soak into the material, and I wasn't going to let that happen. If you smelled like rot, you'd be tracked. Even the slow ones could follow a scent trail if you didn't pay attention. By the end of the week, I had run 6 live trials, 3 clean, 3 with issues. I hadn't been injured. I hadn't taken a bite. But I had learned something critical. Motion control was everything. The armor worked, but only if I respected its limits. Sudden pivots caused knee jam. Shoulder guards reduced upward swing range. Elbow strikes needed tighter angle planning. It wasn't a suit. It was a system. A moving framework that extended my body without replacing it. If I forgot that, I'd die. I stopped calling it armor after that week. I started calling it the rig. That felt more accurate, more honest. I started drafting a manual. Just a simple 1-sheet reference guide. Rig weight, balance point, fail zones, contact recovery, cleaning protocol. I stapled it to the inside of the garage door. Not for me. For whoever found the place next, if I didn't make it back someday. I also started writing audio logs. Short ones. Basic field reports into an old voice recorder I found in the office above the depot. Most were under a minute. Just entries like, Trial 6, Joint 3 shifted under load, replace left knee hinge, do not overextend pivot step, that kind of thing. Food started running low around that time. I still had the peanut butter and 2 more cans of beans, but water had to be filtered daily and the iodine was running out. I began mapping new supply runs. I needed another base of operation, a place I could rotate through. The depot was too risky long-term, and the house wasn't defensible enough against a real swarm. I started scouting nearby rooftops and storage facilities for secondary positioning. I found one. The upper floor of a contractor's warehouse 4 blocks north. Reinforced stairs. Locked doors. Good roof visibility. I didn't move in yet, but I cached supplies there. A spare crowbar, 2 cans, some gauze, a bandage roll, just in case. One of the trial corpses started twitching after an hour. I thought it was done, skull crushed, spine separated, but the fingers kept flexing. That wasn't normal. I double-tapped it with the hammer and dismembered both arms before dragging it out and burning it. I stayed there and watched the whole thing burn to nothing. That night, I made a note in bold. Do not assume dead from skull fracture alone. Sever spine. Burn when possible. I never forgot that one. I built a checklist after 10 days. I called it the 3-2-1 rule. 3 exits planned, 2 backup tools, 1 silent route. No exceptions. No improvising unless absolutely necessary. It saved me twice by the end of the month. By day 30, I had refined every piece of the rig. The helmet had a dual lens system with anti-fog inserts. The arms had reinforced tension bands that allowed full rotation without plate shift. The chest and back had foam shock pads under the primary plates. The legs had gaiter wraps and double-strapped shin guards. Every piece had been field-tested, retuned, and recorded. I could suit up in under 5 minutes and move through a contact zone without a single loose strap or clatter. The infected that came for me died fast and without touching skin. By the start of the 5th week, the depot had become too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels shaped, not natural. Even when the infected weren't nearby, there were always sounds. Loose roofing panels tapping against the wind, rusted carts shifting, rodents moving through the racks. That week, those noises stopped. I ran 3 daily checks from the roof and marked patterns that didn't fit. The weeds by the back fence had been stepped on. A row of carts I'd locked in a zigzag pattern had shifted 3 feet. There was no wind strong enough to do that. I found the faint burn mark of a cigarette at the northwest corner where I always entered. Still recent, still fresh enough to stink. I didn't panic. I adjusted. I cleared the depot of all stored food. I moved the tool cache to a secondary fallback I had built under the flooring of a gutted bait shop 3 blocks away. I sealed all entrances from the inside and exited through the roof. I slept at the house that night, wearing partial armor and a sidearm I'd only used twice before. I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook. I listened. 2 nights later, I caught movement through the bathroom mirror, which I kept angled to watch the front yard without stepping near a window. A pickup truck, flat grey, half rusted, headlights taped over, moved in slow, engine idling like a breath. It stopped just past my neighbor's cracked driveway. 3 figures got out. None of them carried torches. All of them wore jackets heavy enough to mask shapes. No one spoke. The driver stayed in the vehicle, door open, engine still running. The others fanned out and began scanning yards with mounted lights. Short beams, not flashlights, not enough to be casual. I stayed still for an hour. They didn't approach the house directly, but one walked the sidewalk and paused outside the front gate. He stepped close to the mailbox, stared at it, then looked up at the second-floor window. I had sealed it with plywood a month ago. Still held, still dark. He lingered, turned, and walked back without saying a word. The truck pulled away. I knew what that meant. Someone had seen me. Someone had followed me without getting caught. Maybe from a distance. Maybe through a scope. I had tested the rig too many times in the open. I'd gotten used to moving freely, comfortable, and now the story was out. Someone in the region was walking in bite-proof armor, alone, mobile, well-fed. That made me worth watching, worth hunting. I had 2 choices: dig in or divert. Digging in would mean booby-trapping the house, reinforcing every wall, and defending a position I couldn't resupply. I didn't have the numbers, the range, or the time, so I chose the second option. I packed every essential, every tool, every record, and every plate that could be moved. I left the house that night, quiet, controlled. I didn't look back. The fallback at the bait shop wasn't much, an old concrete pad with a raised crawl space, once used for insulation storage. I had cleared it out weeks earlier and hidden 2 supply bins under the slab. It wasn't designed for long stays, just for staging, but it gave me enough cover to strip down the armor, rebuild the pack, and prep for full relocation. My new destination was the contractor warehouse 4 blocks north. I'd scouted it before. Upper floor, internal stairwell, fire door access, rooftop visibility. If I could get in, seal the interior, and hold position, I could stay there for weeks without exposure. I moved at dawn. Full rig, stripped pack, light noise discipline. I cut through a park with broken basketball courts and used the rear alleys to avoid any mainline visibility. Reached the side door of the warehouse in 38 minutes. No sign of recent activity. I bypassed the lock using a bolt shiv and entered through the maintenance corridor. First floor clear. Rotting bags of cement, broken lift carts, dead forklifts. No infected, no scavengers. I found the stairwell and moved to the second floor, cleared it room by room. It was mostly gutted office space, cubicles shattered, file drawers scattered, mold on the walls. But the structure was intact, and the door hinges were solid steel. I found a break room with no windows and made it my new anchor point. From there, I secured the roof hatch, cleaned the stairwell, and began building a perimeter. That night, I slept light. I woke twice to nothing, then again to something real. Truck tires in the distance. Same idle hum. It never came close, but it passed through the area, circling, hunting. I stayed prone and didn't move until sunrise. On day 36, they came. Not loud, not stupid. They parked 2 blocks out and came in on foot. 4 men, 1 woman, all armed, at least 1 scoped rifle. The rest carried short-barreled carbines or handguns. Tactical gear, mismatched armor, nothing clean, all patched together from leftovers. This wasn't a gang. This was a former squad that had stopped playing by anyone's rules but their own. I spotted them from the rooftop using the scavenged binoculars I kept tied to the vent mast. They moved in a sweep pattern, 2 up front, 1 rear, 1 on overwatch, 1 unknown. When they reached the front of the depot, I saw one signal to the others with a fist, then move to the side entry gate. That told me they had either been here before or had watched long enough to learn the layout. They weren't guessing. They were confirming. This was a coordinated probe. I waited. I didn't intervene. I wasn't inside the depot anymore, but I had left gear there to make it look lived in. A few cans, a tarp, 1 water bottle with visible fingerprints. Nothing valuable, just bait. I wanted them to see it and assume I was nearby. That would hold their attention. Give me space. They entered the depot and disappeared inside. The sniper stayed behind on a rooftop half a block south. I kept low and recorded positions. They stayed inside for 20 minutes. Then they left. No one spoke. No one shouted. They didn't take the bait, but they didn't destroy anything either. That meant they weren't raiders in the traditional sense. They were scouts, testing my range, waiting to see if I'd come defend the property. I didn't. I let them go. The next day I moved again, only slightly, just enough to shift. I rigged false trails with boot prints in mud, bent grass in deliberate arcs, wrappers left at angles only visible from second-story windows. I was feeding them information I wanted them to follow. I wanted them watching the wrong areas. On day 38, I intercepted their second push. They came earlier, just 3 this time, 1 lookout, 2 sweepers. The infected came first. Not mine, wild ones. A group of 5 wandered in from the west, drawn by scent or noise or memory. The sweepers didn't hear them until the fence line, and by then, one of them got grabbed at the knee. His scream gave away the whole team. The lookout fired a short burst from his rifle, took out 2, and the rest scattered. But not before I saw one of them drop a comm unit and abandon it in the gutter. I waited an hour, then I retrieved it. It was old school, military surplus, analog frequencies, scratched, water damage, but the battery had a charge. The last call was still active on the log. It was coded. Just 1 word, vulture. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew what it told me. They weren't just a group. They had structure. They had name signs, and they were targeting anyone who didn't move in numbers. I burned the radio, took it apart first, stripped the battery, melted the board with a soldering torch, then dropped the remains down a storm drain near a culvert half a mile away. I didn't want it found. I didn't want it traced. I changed my patrol routes and stopped returning to the same shelter twice in a row. By day 40, the armor had a reputation. I could feel it in the way people moved. A woman on a rooftop near the old bank froze when she saw me crossing the intersection in full rig. She didn't call out. She didn't threaten. She backed away and vanished into the stairwell. No fear, just caution. Like seeing something that shouldn't exist walking into a zone no one controlled. A story made real. The armored ghost. The revenant. I didn't speak to anyone. Not yet. But I started hearing my own myth told in fragments. Graffiti scratched into old metal doors, notes pinned to trees, phrases like, "He walks through them like they're not there," and "Saw the armored man, didn't chase, didn't stay." It wasn't fame, it was distance. That was enough. I passed through the west sector of the supply zone around noon. Weather was clear. Heat wasn't bad yet. I stayed along the alley grids that cut behind the retail strip, checking rooftops and fire escapes the same way I'd done every week since I relocated. Most of the buildings around there were picked clean. Old phone store, a shuttered dental office, 2 laundromats with broken washers flipped sideways like someone had been digging under them. The farther I moved, the less I expected to find. I wasn't looking for food. I was watching for movement. Something had changed on the rooftops. I couldn't explain how I noticed it at first, but the shift was subtle. Trash that used to scatter in the wind had been swept into piles. The pieces of tarp draped over one of the HVAC boxes were weighted down with bricks. Someone had been keeping that roof tidy, not recently, but often enough to prevent the mess from building up. That meant traffic, human traffic, controlled, repeated. I moved to the parking structure across the street. It was partially collapsed on the east end, but the second level still held. I climbed to the top deck and found a shaded corner where I could observe without being seen. Binoculars up, movement confirmed. A boy, maybe 14, 15, crawling low across the rooftop of the old pawn shop, near the vent stack. He wore a brown jacket several sizes too big and carried what looked like a sawed-off baseball bat wrapped in cloth. He stayed low, never stood up fully, his head scanned constantly. Not careless, practiced. He had done this before. I watched him for 10 minutes. He moved with caution, not panic. He stopped twice to peer over the edge, then backed into a blind spot behind a chimney where I lost visual. I waited. When he didn't reappear, I repositioned twice and circled the structure at a wide distance. I didn't approach directly. If he was part of a larger group, I wasn't going to walk into an ambush. If he was alone, I still didn't trust him not to panic and do something stupid. People that age didn't survive long unless they were part of something harder, or just lucky. The next morning, I returned before sunrise and posted up at the same vantage point. I brought a full pack, partial armor, no long weapon. I stayed still and waited. At 7:23, he reappeared. Same movement pattern, same rooftop route. He carried something wrapped in foil, probably food, and placed it behind the chimney. A minute later, a second figure emerged. A girl, smaller, younger, couldn't have been more than 10. She sat with her back against the vent shaft while he unwrapped the foil and split whatever was inside between them. That was it. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I didn't try to show myself. I just watched. I waited another day before doing anything. On the third day, I left a note. I folded it into a small square, tied it to the handle of a taped-up wrench, and threw it underhanded from the parking deck to the opposite rooftop. I didn't aim to hit them, just close enough to land near their position without risk. The noise startled them. The boy stood, held the bat in front of him, searched the skyline. I didn't show myself. He eventually picked up the wrench, opened the note, and read. It said, "Not a threat. I saw you first. You're doing better than most. Stay smart." No name, no demand, no invitation, just confirmation that they'd been noticed. I wanted to see what he would do. The next morning, there was a mark on the parking deck railing. A strip of cloth tied to the side beam, blue and frayed at the edge. It hadn't been there before. That was his answer. No words, no meeting, but no running either. We played that game for 5 more days. I left minor tools where he could find them. Extra batteries, a clean water canister, 1 solar lighter. He left behind torn wrappers, indicating his roots. We didn't speak, we didn't wave, but there was recognition. I began moving through that zone more often. Then something went wrong. I was running a gear test in the northern lane, checking elbow range with the latest reinforcements, when I heard an impact. Dull, heavy, followed by a short, muffled cry. I froze. 2 blocks over. I took cover behind a derailed bus and waited. The cry came again, short, panicked, high-pitched. I moved fast, not reckless, rounded a half-collapsed laundromat and reached the edge of the pawn shop. 2 infected in the alley. The boy was standing on the hood of a vehicle, swinging the bat with both hands, while the girl tried to climb the rear ladder of a trash truck. I didn't hesitate. I charged. The armor clattered louder than I liked, but I needed speed. I caught the first infected in the spine with a shoulder blow. It went down hard. The second turned too late. I hooked its leg with a sweep and pinned it under my knee before crushing the skull. No finesse, no delay. The boy stared at me like I was another threat. He raised the bat again. I backed off 1 step, then pointed to the ladder. The girl was frozen halfway up, stuck between rungs. Her hands were bleeding. I knelt beside the truck, pulled her free, and carried her into the adjacent building, still in full rig. The boy followed. He didn't lower the bat until I closed the door behind us. She had a fractured wrist and a shallow bite across her calf. Not deep, not bleeding heavily, but the teeth had broken skin. I examined it under clean light from a pocket lamp. She was lucky. The bite had scraped more than punctured, no black around the edges, no heat in the tissue yet. I cleaned it with alcohol, wrapped it in gauze, and warned him it might still turn. He finally spoke, told me her name was June, his name was Noah. No last names given, no place of origin. He didn't ask mine. I didn't offer it. That was fine. They had been surviving off rooftop caches and partial trade with two older scavengers from the southeast side. Those scavengers hadn't returned in weeks, probably dead. The kids had been moving zones every 3 days, never staying long. That last alley had been a miscalculation. They'd risked it for canned fruit buried under trash bags in the back of a shattered grocery store. The fruit was gone. So were the scavengers. I told them to stay in the contractor building for 3 nights. I reinforced the stairwell with shelving racks and cleared the second floor again. I let them eat my food. I didn't ask questions. I watched, observed. Noah never left her side. She spoke in fragments, mostly at night, whispering songs to herself. Noah carried the bat even when he slept. I respected that. I didn't want company. I hadn't planned for it. But when I heard June cry out during the second night, nightmare or pain or both, I stood in the hallway in full rig and watched the door for over an hour. Nothing came, but I stayed anyway. The next morning, I took Noah to the rooftop and showed him how to spot infected from shadow contrast, not just movement. He learned quick, had a good eye, understood distance, understood sound range. I handed him one of my backup mirror shards and showed him how to check corners without exposing skin. He asked a few questions. Simple, focused. I answered them all. I started writing new field notes after that. Not just armor performance, I logged instructions, step-by-step breakdowns of movement drills, contact protocol, retreat planning. I wrote them like someone else might need to read them. Someone younger, someone not ready yet. By the 5th night, June's fever had faded. The wound hadn't turned. I cleaned it again and adjusted the wrap. I taught her how to breathe through pain, how to sit upright to keep swelling down, how to grip a tool handle with both hands, even if her wrist was weak. I wasn't a doctor, but I remembered how my wife handled field triage in the early months. She'd shown me what mattered and what didn't. I gave Noah a basic vest with one of my old side plates rigged into the lining. It was heavy for him. He didn't complain. He trained in it every morning, stepping across the rooftop with slow, deliberate foot placement. I let him hold the crowbar once, just for feel. He handled it like a real tool, not a weapon. That mattered. I didn't ask them to stay. I didn't ask them to leave. But on day 49, when I packed up the rig and headed toward the depot for a hardware run, Noah followed. No words, no hesitation. He carried his bag and the bat. I adjusted his shoulder strap so it wouldn't catch on door frames. The depot felt colder that morning, even before the rain. Not temperature, air pressure. Something heavy had settled over the entire block. The wind was still. The clouds hadn't broken yet, but the air had that stillness before a storm rolls in. I stepped through the northeast breach with Noah a few paces behind me. He didn't ask questions. He had the bat secured to his pack with an old sling I'd reinforced with zip ties. His movement was tighter now. He stepped where I stepped. He ducked without being told. We didn't need to talk. Inside, the depot was as we left it. Quiet. That made me nervous. The infected had thinned out recently. Not cleared, just redistributed. I had a theory that weather systems messed with their sense of direction. Pressure changes, static discharge, scent trails interrupted by crosswinds. Whatever it was, the usual wanderers weren't loitering. Not on this side of the block. I ran a visual sweep from the garden cage, eyes on the tree line, the highway break, the broken fence behind the contractor gate. Nothing moved. Still, I adjusted our plan. No deep interior search. No noise-based lures. Just a part sweep along the near aisles. Fasteners. New shock pad material. Electrical casing for rigging a better light rail. I kept Noah outside the building proper for the first 15 minutes, posted as lookout with the mirror shard, while I did the first pass. By the time I made my second turn through the tool corral, I felt the pressure drop again, this time sharp. The glass in the broken skylight creaked. The hairs on my arm rose under the armor's inner mesh. I signaled Noah with a single arm raise. He moved in, crouched low, eyes on me. I handed him the secondary pack and pointed to the fallback corridor. He understood. We'd run the drill twice before. If weather hit or contact exceeded 3, he was to move to the sealed bay door, lock it from the inside, and wait. The storm hit faster than I expected. Lightning cracked somewhere northeast, probably over the river. Thunder followed instantly. Then the roof panels began to shudder. The old building flexed under the wind. Something fell 2 aisles over. Not a shelf, something heavier. I crouched low and pulled Noah behind the sandbag alcove we'd rigged last month. We waited. That's when the noise started. Not thunder, not wind. The low groaning vocalizations of a moving group. Dozens, maybe more. I checked the back fence through the slats in the barricade. They were pouring in through the tree line, moving fast and without scattering. The wind must have funneled them off the freeway, a mass drift, blind, but driven. The scent from our previous lures was still in the depot. They picked it up fast. That, combined with the sound of shifting metal from the storm, drew them in like a magnet. I counted 18 within the first 10 seconds. Too many. The rig couldn't handle swarm pressure like that. I turned to Noah and gave him a push toward the fallback corridor. He hesitated. I pushed again. He went. I moved behind him, drawing the rolling rack across the entryway just as the first infected smashed against the perimeter fencing. I heard the chain snap before I reached the inner corridor. It wasn't built to hold that many. The corner section collapsed and the metal clanged against the concrete. Feet pounded the floor. Hands slammed against walls and loose siding. The storm outside masked most of the noise, but the direction was clear. They were inside now, and closing. I got the interior door closed and bolted just as 3 figures appeared at the far end. One of them was fast, sprinted into the shelving unit and knocked it over without stopping. The other 2 came behind, slower, arms wide. I turned Noah toward the ladder and pointed up. He didn't argue this time. He climbed to the ventilation platform above the corridor and held position. I braced against the inner frame and waited for contact. The first one slammed into the door, shoulder first, then again, then again. The rig's knee guards kept me braced, and the shock pads absorbed most of the impact, but the force was stacking. I dropped my right arm and activated the side hook, a curved spike mounted on a spring bar I'd built for crowd clearing. When the next one reached through the door gap, I snapped it upward and locked the hook against the shoulder blade. It pulled the infected forward and off balance. I slammed the crowbar through the skull and kicked the body back. I didn't wait for the others. I backed down the hall, retreated toward the flare cache near the supply crates. I triggered one flare and rolled it into the far side of the corridor. Red light filled the space. The infected hesitated. They always did with sudden light. It didn't stop them, but it gave me 3 seconds. I used that time to reach the wall and pull down the trap sheet, a full stack of box tile rigged to fall when the anchor cords were pulled. The boxes crashed onto the floor and buried 2 of the walkers. Bones snapped. One stopped moving. The other crawled. I didn't let it finish. I stepped in and crushed the neck, then finished the skull with the edge of the hammer, clean, fast. I cleared the debris and motioned for Noah to drop. He landed hard, rolled once, came up with the bat ready. I nodded. We moved. The rest of the depot was compromised. Every route I'd mapped was filling. The noise had drawn in dozens more. They weren't smart, but they were packed tight. We had maybe 4 minutes before the internal choke points collapsed. I led him through the inventory lane and toward the garden cages. It was our last clear exit. At the corner turn, one infected burst from a side office and grabbed Noah by the arm. He went down, hard. I lunged in, slammed the rig's shoulder against the attacker, knocked it clear, and dropped my knee into its ribs. The bite caught my forearm plate. Deep impact. I felt the pressure, the crack in the top plate. I braced with my other hand and drove the crowbar down into its mouth until the skull gave way. Noah scrambled back and pulled himself up. I didn't check him for damage. No time. We reached the garden cage gate and found it blocked. Shelves collapsed inward. Debris jammed into the path. I turned to Noah, pointed at the vent crawl under the tool bench. He dropped, squeezed through. I stayed behind, turned, and held the choke. 4 infected were closing. I swung wide, 2 connected. I felt the strain in my wrist. The 3rd got behind the shelving. I backed into the crawl and kicked the bench down behind me. The whole structure fell into place and sealed the route. We escaped through the garden center's open roof. The storm was in full now. Wind, rain, sharp debris in the air. I covered Noah with my body while we moved across the open stretch. Lightning hit a tree behind us and lit the whole block white. I didn't look back. We ran until we cleared the strip, then took cover in a drainage channel near the rail yard. We waited there, soaked, panting, unmoving, for over an hour. When we finally stood, Noah was limping slightly but uninjured. I removed the broken forearm plate and checked the damage. Bite had left a full crack across the top edge. No penetration, but the material was compromised. I dropped the plate into the runoff and replaced it with a spare from my backpack. Not perfect, but enough to get home. We didn't speak on the walk back. He didn't need reassurance. I didn't have any to give. We moved as 2 people who had seen the line and not crossed it. That was enough. Back at the warehouse, I logged the breach in full detail. Floor plan failure, flare delay, choke collapse, arm plate integrity limits. Noah sat with June, cleaned his gear, checked his pack. I watched them. He didn't flinch when she touched the bruises on his forearm. He didn't brag, didn't talk, just unwrapped his food and handed her the first half. After the depot breach, I didn't go back for 5 days. Not to scout, not to salvage, not even to see if the infected had moved on. There was nothing there I needed anymore. The training ground had done its job. It had shown me the armor's limits. It had taught Noah how to move. It had given us a full test under pressure. But the depot was never meant to last. It was a temporary space. Like everything else in this world. You hold a place until you don't. Then you leave before it gets you killed. Instead, I stayed inside the warehouse and began the process I'd avoided until then. Documentation, not field notes, not kill logs, not schematics scattered across plywood and torn boxes. A full build manual, clear, step by step, page by page. I laid out every component of the rig and started taking photos using the old phone I kept tied into the charger on the corner workbench. Noah held the camera steady. June kept a parts list and checked each one off as we labeled it. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't need to. The manual began with an overview of the system, what it was, what it wasn't. I wrote in plain terms. No fluff, no promises, just function. I explained that this rig wouldn't make you invincible. It would not stop bullets. It would not make you faster. It was loud if you moved wrong. It would tire you out if you didn't build your endurance. But it would stop a bite. It would keep a walker's jaw from reaching skin. And it could buy you the time to finish a fight and walk away still breathing. I included every version of the design I had built, rig V0.1 all the way to 4.0. Each version had notes on failure points, strap tension, hinge torque, pressure points under stress. I included sketches of modified faceplate mounts and instructions for fitting a hydration pack into the rear compartment. I made sure to highlight every mistake I'd made. The early wrist plate that tore free under a side grab, the chest mount that restricted crouch movement, the elbow rig that caused fatigue after 5 minutes of overhead swing. I wrote these things in bold, boxed in red marker. I made separate sections for material sourcing, where to get the base plates, cutting boards, riot gear, motorcycle panels, where to scavenge heavy-duty foam, exercise mats, old pads, construction knee braces. I included diagrams for padding out gaps using duct tape and layered cloth if armor-grade material couldn't be found. I wrote down what to avoid: hard plastic that cracks on impact, thin metal that folds under load, loose straps that catch on broken fence or rebar. Noah added a section for basic drills. He insisted on it. He said if someone found the armor and didn't know how to move in it, they'd still die. I watched him handwrite the routine. 5 steps forward, 3 back, crouch, pivot, overhand strike, step left, Step right, reset. He drew it in lines with a pencil, like a football play diagram. I kept it exactly as he wrote it. June traced the outline of each armor piece on salvaged cardboard sheets, then labeled them in her own handwriting. Shoulder guard, forearm shell, shin plate, spine strip. Her letters were uneven, but clear. She didn't say much, but when I asked her why she wanted to do it, she shrugged and said, "So people know what the pieces look like when they're not put together." I taped every one of her outlines into the last section of the manual. We spent 2 weeks finishing it, 87 pages. Photos, diagrams, instructions, notes. We printed 4 copies using a solar-powered inkjet I'd found back in the municipal offices and rigged with rewired lithium packs. The ink was light but legible. We laminated the cover of each one using thick plastic pulled from an old signage board and clear tape around the edges. I didn't want them falling apart after the first rain. We placed 1 copy in the contractor warehouse, inside a steel lockbox under the stairs, sealed in 2 trash bags and labeled in both English and pictographs. Another we placed in a backpack along with spare tools, rations, and a flash drive with the images. We left that bag in a crawl space beneath the church at the edge of the trade road, an area scavengers were known to pass through. A 3rd copy I gave to Noah and told him it was his responsibility now. He didn't argue. He added it to the center of his pack, wrapped in cloth, and reinforced the buckle. The 4th copy I kept, but not for long. On day 73, I told them I was leaving. Not far, just farther than they could follow for now. I explained that the next outpost I needed to check was over the river, and I didn't trust the crossings. Too exposed, too narrow. I couldn't protect both of them in full contact while carrying the rig weight. Noah offered to come anyway. June didn't say anything, but her hand closed around his wrist when he did. I told them to stay, build out the safe zone, keep training. Use the rig only if the perimeter fell or if they were moving under high threat. Otherwise, stay light, stay fast, stay smart. I gave them the fallback maps. I circled every known supply cache, water source, and shelter in the area we'd covered. I wrote 1 final page into the manual and titled it, "If This Is All You Found." It explained how to rebuild the entire suit from nothing, how to move in it, how to think like someone who wore it, and how to build the next version. Better, lighter, smarter. I ended it with 1 line. "You're not alone. Someone already survived this long. So can you." Before I left, I checked every armor piece 1 last time. The shock pads held. The spine mount didn't rattle. The hip load was still balanced at under 25% of total weight. The faceplate latches worked without jamming, and the fog shield had stayed clear through the last 4 contact drills. I packed light. Just the rig, the backup flare kit, the filtered canteens, and 1 week's food. I left the secondary rig Noah had started building. He could finish it now. Maybe build more. Maybe teach someone else. I didn't ask him to promise anything. I didn't need to. I stepped out just before sunrise. The sky was low and grey. No birds. No sound. Just the soft drag of wind against the edge of the rooftop where I'd spent most of the last month. I adjusted the rear plate, secured the helmet, and walked until the warehouse was no longer in view. I moved east toward the river, toward whatever came next. I didn't know if the manual would help anyone. Maybe it would rot in some flooded basement. Maybe it would sit in a sealed drawer until dust covered it, and the next person passed by without checking. But maybe it would reach someone who didn't know how to fight yet. Someone cornered. Someone just smart enough to follow instructions and not die in the first 30 seconds. That's all for now, survivor. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep these stories alive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. And a huge thank you to everyone supporting this channel with extra memberships, especially Rangers and Legends, Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod. Thanks. Also drop a comment and let me know what story you want to hear next. Jack's Nightmares signing off.